as I prepared to meet with my two colleagues here and to begin recording something today, I the topic occurred to me a few days ago, and I realized that I have been doing this now for more than a year. Uh, there are more than 60 episodes of my talking, and I have a confession to make. I never looked at what's there. I simply move on from week to week and skipping a few weeks when schedule interferes and keep bringing up things to talk about. So I may start getting redundant because I don't check to see if I've talked about something before I start again. And I apologize if I've gotten into the depths of my topic today on some other occasion. But what I want to talk about, the title is in my mind because it's a paper I keep intending to write, never get around to writing. But what I want to talk about is my experience of what I've come to call the gift of cancer. And I am going to explore topics like what it means to die, feelings about dying, concepts that I see clients struggling with and about confronting dying or running away from confronting dying. Ernst Becker in The Denial of Death says that most of the teaching of people in the mental health professions is very limited, with the exception of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. There is not sufficient attention to the fact that humans die. Freud himself once said that to be concerned about death is morbid. In traditional psychoanalytic literature, there are no articles about death and dying. That's a fairly recent add-on to what we struggled with. And Becker, I think, is right that the denial of death overcomes all of us, and we pull back from wanting to cope with it, deal with the topic, immerse ourselves in it, think about it, and try to understand what the impact of knowing that we're going to die is on human existence. So this is my attempt to immerse myself in those challenges today. Oh, good. I go way back now. There was a time when I was in my 40s that I got very preoccupied with dying. Now I'm going to quote Carlos Castaneda and the teachings of Don Juan. He says for all of us, death, which is I'm quoting him pretty well, death, our distant enemy, comes one day to stand by our side, and from then on walk shoulder and shoulder with us. And I think that's true for everybody that I know. At some point, death becomes much more real. We're capable of doing thought stopping when we're younger. We know that everything dies, everything living dies, but we push the thoughts away. It's morbid. We don't need to think about that now. We're immortal. And if there is such a thing as death, we're nowhere near having to be concerned with that. So let's turn our attention elsewhere. At some point in life, for all of us, death comes to throw a bigger shadow and to move closer to us, as Castaneda said. It's been my experience with the clients that I see that typically the beginnings of really trying to come to grips with death take place somewhere in the late 50s or on into the 60s. That seems to be normative. A sense of having aged and not being eternal anymore begins to set in, and people start thinking about their own dying. For me, it happened earlier. I was cursed with the fact that my father died when I was 12 and he was only 48. And his older brother had died at age 32. And his mother had died at age 38. They all had coronary artery disease and they all died fairly young. So as I moved on into my 40s, I started to get frightened. And there is something I think in us men. If our fathers have died, we're always getting frightened as we approach how old our father was when he died, that maybe our turn is coming and we're going to die. So I can remember one day I was 47 years old. My clock radio went off. I reached over to turn it off, and as I moved out of sleepiness and into full wake, I felt a panic attack. I heard my own voice yelling silently inside of myself, "You're going to die." Now, I knew I wasn't going to die at that moment. I was in reasonable health, but the sense that death could not be escaped, it was inevitable, had set in on me that day. And I continued to reverberate with moments of anxiety, fear about dying, worry that I was going to die before the year was out. And I wound up talking to my wife, and my solution for my dilemma seemed to be I encouraged her to come with me to make a trip to my father's grave that I hadn't been to since I was 12 years old. Somehow, if I could reestablish some connection with him at the graveside, somehow that would ward off death. It was almost like a magical thing I was going to do. Reconnect with my father and you won't die. That's quite crazy, but it seemed to make sense to me at the time. And I think I talked about visiting his grave on that occasion in another lecture. So, what I think is quite normative is I did not die before I turned 48. I'm now 90, going on 91. And the panic started to subside, and death was only something I thought about periodically. In the beginning, it was with a lot of fear. Oh my God, I'm going to die. How? There's no way out. There's no way to escape. I can't avoid it. I didn't have the comfort of religious beliefs either. I didn't believe in reincarnation. I didn't believe in other lives after this life. I was stuck with being a cynical atheist. And I knew for me, death was like watching a television set. You reach over, you turn the knob off, and it goes black, and that's it. It's over. That's it. Goodbye. And that was coming. And that seemed terribly frightening to me. As I moved through my 50s and 60s, I would visit the fear periodically. I would try to make peace with it somehow. I never did make very effective peace. But somewhere in my 60s or early 70s, it began to transform itself. I was no longer terrified about dying. The act of dying itself did not seem like a bad thing to me. I was still frightened, and I am frightened every once in a while that the last portion of my life is going to be hideously horrible and painful. I'm going to be a vegetable in a coma, or I'm going to have terrible pain from God knows what. Those fears are still with me. But the very moment of dying is not frightening to me anymore. As a matter of fact, if I'm locked in some hideousness, I'm sure the moment of dying will feel like a liberation from what I'm locked in before I die. I also believe in the stories I've heard about what are called near-death experiences, that as people move seemingly towards death, they have peacefulness settles in, a white light of some kind appears. Images of other people long dead may come to them as if they are about to be re-embrace the people who have died in previous generations. Moving to a beautiful place occurs to them. So I have a physiological explanation for that. I think the brain, as it dies, secretes some kind of chemical that produces that kind of imagery for us. So the very last moment just before death, I will know one day in those seconds, I believe will be quite peaceful and lovely, and that most people die in some kind of good peace in the last few seconds before they stop breathing and the heart stops. So none of that frightens me anymore. What comes instead is a profound sadness. I really like being alive. It's an interesting, wonderful, complex, sometimes terrible, painful, agonizing, confusing, frustrating, enraging dilemma. But it's with all those textures, it's still something, such a gift, such magic. I can't understand people who have had difficult lives who say, I wish I'd never been born. No matter what I've gone through, I've never wished I'd never been born. I feel like this is really such an amazing thing that I've been handed, a chance to live a human life. And I'd like to keep it going as long as possible. So what's replaced fear is sadness. I don't want to surrender my consciousness. I enjoy being conscious. I enjoy the challenges I have to go through. I even enjoy somehow having things to be pissed off about and trying to figure out what to do about them. I enjoy disappointments. I enjoy the maddening behavior of other people. I enjoy the human circus. I want to be a participant, and I want the ride never to end. And I know that's not going to happen. So periodically I weep about that. Now, knowing that death is moving closer has had a profound effect on me. That's why I call what I went through the gift of cancer. And it's a really good effect. I think without having had a cancer diagnosis, I wouldn't be living the days of my life currently the way I am, and I wouldn't be feeling so joyous about being alive in the way that I feel joyous. So I will tell next the story of my cancer. Uh, I'll go around by way of grandmother's barn. One of the people in this world that I miss is my former internist. His name was Graham Waring. He was born in Britain, so he had a very British name. And he came to the United States. He received his medical training here and stayed here. And he was really a wonderful, creative, kind internist and very smart. He was often in Southern California the diagnostician of last resort. When other internists were working with somebody and they couldn't figure out what was wrong or what to do about it, Graham would be consulted with. He would be asked to see the patient to give us a second opinion about what this was all about. And his words, the word of his capability spread. He was actually the staff physician to the president of the King of Jordan. The royal family of Jordan was under his care, and he would frequently get on an airplane and go to Jordan if there was some medical problem there. And he loved the travel, and he loved being self-important that way. One of the things he was always very good at figuring out what was wrong with me and my family and taking good care of us. But one of the things I really appreciated is he didn't like the laws about terminal illness. He told us soon after we started working with him, and I'll stop in mid sentence. If you went for an annual physical with Graham Waring, you were there for 2 hours. He really took his time. He looked at everything, every last blood test. He felt everything. He palpated everything, and he wanted to talk about everything. Everything that was on your mind, everything you were doing, everything you were worried about, everything that you were preoccupied with. He really was thorough about the mind and the body. And I loved it. I loved the care and patience that he took. Uh, as we developed our relationship with him, my wife and I, somewhere into knowing him, he said, as you get older, don't be frightened. He said, I don't believe in the law. If you guys get into a lot of medical trouble and you're hurting and getting close to dying, just do this. Check out of the hospital and go home. And if you go home, I will come and I will off you. I will put you out of your misery. I don't believe in prolonging suffering. I know I'm breaking the law, but I can't do it in my office because there's a nurse there, and I can't go to the hospital and do it there either. But if you'll just get yourself taken home, I can come over by myself and I'll sign the death certificate. I'll put something on it that the cause of death was a sudden heart collapse or whatever it needs to be, and that I was called for that purpose to come to the house because you were in trouble. So that felt like such a comfort, as a matter of fact, that he would put us out of our suffering. So I am very sad to report I have outlived him. 5 years ago. I wasn't close to being ready to die yet. He came down with a hideously malignant cancer, and he was unable to save himself, and the City of Hope was unable to save him. And within a year of the diagnosis, he had died. It was a terribly fast-moving malignant leukemia he had. There's no cure for it. So I've had to adapt to a new physician now, and I don't know if he's going to kill me if I get into trouble. I haven't had that conversation with him, but the law has changed too. So I know there's a way if I have a terminal illness, I can off myself now. I don't have to depend on some physician to do it. Graham, however, is human, and he failed me. In the year, see, I have to remember the chronology. In the year about 2000, I was having some pain in my sternum. I now know it was the beginning of my cancer. He did not, and I did not at the time. I didn't know it had anything to do with cancer at all. Pain in one's sternum is not usually a sign of any kind of cancer. He thought I may have injured myself playing tennis. My intercostal muscles may have gotten strained lunging for a ball or something. So he urged me just to take some relief periodically and to take hot and cold showers, and hot shower in the morning and ice it in the evening. And he thought the pain would resolve within a period of 4 or 5 days. And the pain did resolve in a period of 4 or 5 days. It went away. Only now, in retrospect, do I know that that was the beginning of bone pain. It wasn't the intercostal muscles at all. It was actually pain that was emanating in my sternum, in the bone itself. Fast forward, I went on, I lived my life. In the year 2003, something happened in my shoulder. My shoulder began to hurt. And as a conservative doctor, he put me through the same thing. He said, I think you may have strained or torn your rotator cuff a little bit, and do the same thing. Take a very hot shower and stand it in the morning. Take an anti-inflammatory and then ice the shoulder at night before you go to bed for about 30 minutes. And let's see if it goes away. Well, it didn't go away. It started to get worse. He said, you may have done some more serious damage to your rotator cuff. I'll tell you what, I'll give you a steroid shot. You don't have to go to a bone and joint surgeon. I'll give you a steroid shot in the joint between your humerus and your shoulder socket, and I think I can get you out of pain. And he said, I am better than the most doctors who give steroid shots. I use a very fine dental needle, so it doesn't hurt like they hurt you. It'll take a little bit longer for me to squeeze it through the fine needle, but you won't even feel it, he said. And he was right. I didn't feel it. And 30 minutes after he gave me the shot, my shoulder began to feel a lot better. Within 2 days, however, all the pain was back. He said, well, maybe I didn't get the shot in exactly the right spot. Just wait a while, go back to the conservative treatment and see what happens. Well, that was my left arm, and it was getting so bad I had to have my arm in my lap. I couldn't move it. Every time I moved it, it was an agony. And I was reaching around the steering wheel like that to turn the ignition on. We still had the ignition where you put the key in and then rotated this thing on the steering column in order to start the car. So I was driving with one hand and keeping my arm in my lap because every time I needed to move it, it was causing me difficulty and hurting. And it seemed to be getting worse and worse. So eventually, of course, after many days, he says, all right, it's time to get an MRI. And I said, that's fine. I said, oh my God, I probably something is bad there. I'm probably going to need surgery. So I went off to get the MRI in the morning. And he had told me he'd get the results sometimes during the day. And he would call me later in the day and give me the results. So at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he called and I picked up the phone and he said, why don't you come in? I want to discuss the MRI with you. Could you come in at 4 o'clock? I have free time. And I said, sure, I'll come. I hung up the phone and I said to my wife, I have cancer. And he, why was he asking me to come in to give me results? He easily could have done it over the phone. And my wife said, I'm going with you. So we went at 4 o'clock to see Graham. And I said, I believe I have cancer. And he said, well, you have a problem. Let's not race ahead. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. You need some more diagnostic studies. It is not the joint that's the problem. The top of your humerus doesn't look good. It looks like it's cracked, and something is there. And let's not say it's cancer yet at this point. Uh, but I have arranged. I have a friend who's an oncologist, and he's waiting. After you and I talk for a little while, he said he's going to stay late tonight. You can go over to his place at 5 o'clock, and he'll try to explain you what are the possibilities and what should happen next. It's not my area of expertise. If it is possibly cancer, he will take over and he will supervise what needs to be done with you. And I thanked him for that. And I'm really good when there's a big challenge. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on denial and fantasy. So I immediately became robotic and zombie-like. I had no feelings particularly. I had left those behind somewhere, locked up in some kind of closet. All I had was problem solving. I was supposed to go to the oncologist and get more information. That's good. That's the next thing that will happen. We'll go to the oncologist who was close by and get more information. So we went there, and I'm wonderfully numb and feelingless. My wife looks haunted, and the oncologist was really a lovely man, and he said, your shoulder has fractured. It's the bone. It's the top of your humerus bone is fractured. It's in two pieces with jagged edges, and that's why you've been in a lot of pain. Clearly, your shoulder needs to be repaired. That will take you out of pain. That's going to be the first step. And he said, I have an appointment for you tomorrow with a really good shoulder surgeon, and he will see you at 10 o'clock in the morning. And he said, that's when we're going to find out what's really wrong with you, because there will be a pathologist in the room while the surgery is being done, and he will take tissue samples of the area around where the break is, and he'll be able to make a diagnosis. If it is a cancer, it's most likely one of three cancers. And I said, oh, and he said, well, one of them is bone sarcoma. And I won't lie to you. If you have bone sarcoma, your life expectancy is that about 80% of people with a diagnosis of bone sarcoma are dead within about a year. And he said, I would encourage you to get your affairs in order, and I will supervise trying to hold off the bone sarcoma for killing you as long as possible. But I don't want to paint any rosy picture for you that I can't deliver. So that's the most likely range of what's going to happen to you. Second thing is, there may be some cancer somewhere else in your body. And what's happened is a metastasis of a cancer that's really the host of the cancer is somewhere else in your body, in your colon or in your liver or who knows where. And if that's the case, if it's a metastasis of another kind of cancer, we're going to have to do a scan of your whole body and see where the other sites are and where the biggest concentration is, and work out a treatment plan. But if it's a metastasis, you're in stage 4 cancer from some other very virulent cancer, and your prognosis is not very good in stage 4 cancer either. I would suggest, with the state of our knowledge as we know it now, most likely, again, you wouldn't have much more than a year's life expectancy with a stage 4 cancer that has metastasized in such a vicious way that your bone is breaking. The last thing it might be is a cancer called multiple myeloma. And he said, that's not nearly as likely. It's not a very frequent cancer. Only a small percent of the population gets multiple myeloma. We don't know what causes it really. It may be related to chemicals in the environment. He said, did you ever have your skin in a lot of benzene for any reason? And I said, not benzene, but when I was a teenager, I worked in my stepfather's auto shop and gas station. I had my hands in gasoline a lot, and I had my hands in kerosene. I was cleaning greasy auto parts and getting ready to reinstall them. And we didn't wear rubber gloves back then, so some of the chemicals were benzenes, and some of them were other kinds of zines, gasoline. I'm sure those were chemicals were not good for me. And yes, I was breathing the vapors often, and I was maybe importing some of it through my skin. He said, well, that may have caused multiple myeloma in you, he said, but we don't know. And I said, well, how long do you think I might live if I have multiple myeloma? He said, well, that would be better. We're learning how to treat it better now. I would say the average space between diagnosis and death is now 3 years, he said. And that felt wonderful. Maybe I could live 3 more years. That sounded delicious to me. He said, yeah, and the quality of your life will not be bad if you could live those 3 years. You'll be surprised how easily it is to repair your shoulder. And I'm sure you could get out of pain within the next week. See the surgeon, get the surgery as quick as possible, and you'll start healing. And when the pain goes away, you'll feel better. So off I went. I saw the surgeon the next day, and the day after that, he had reserved the operating room. And oh my God, I started to develop the greatest respect and admiration for advances in the medical profession's capability to do things that I didn't know a damn thing about at the time. First of all, how did he repair my shoulder? Well, he told me what he was going to do. He was going to put a titanium rod down the center of the bone marrow in my humerus and leave the top exposed, and then scoop out the bone marrow in the broken place up above, trim the edges, and he was going to put bolts through the bone and into the titanium rod, and he would bolt the arm back together with a titanium rod stabilizing it all. And he could do it with an arthroscope. He didn't have to make a big incision. He only needed to make a tiny incision to stick the scope in at the bottom of the bone and one at the top near the shoulder. And that's all I have. I have hardly any scar whatsoever. And I have a titanium rod in the bone. And all the bone grew totally over the titanium rod again. It's totally enclosed in bone once more. And the bone all grew back. And so I went under the anesthetic. My wife was sitting in the waiting room. The pathologist introduced myself, and I was waiting to come out of the anesthetic to find out what kind of cancer I had. My wife heard before I did. And the phone call came from the cell phone of the surgeon to my wife's cell phone in the waiting room. And wonder of wonders, I had multiple myeloma. And she was ecstatic with joy. I'm going to cry. How wonderful. I had multiple myeloma. I might have 3 more years to live. I wasn't going to die quickly. Oh, God. Now, I didn't find out until I was coming out of the anesthetic. And I could have jumped with joy, too. That seemed like a delicious thing. I was going to be able to live for probably at least 3 more years. That sounded just so unbelievably awesome. That's the beginning of the gift of cancer. Oh, I, of course, learned more. The oncologist took me back over. I learned more about the disease I had. It is a disease of the bone marrow. Up until that time, I had simply thought, like I assume most lay people do, that we grow bones. We're born with bones. They get bigger and bigger as we grow. They increase in size as we increase in size. And eventually we reach our full growth. And then I assume our skeleton is just there for the rest of our lives. No, all the bones in our skeleton are quite dynamic, like all the other tissue in the body. Bone is constantly dying and being replenished, and dying and being replenished. If you have multiple myeloma, however, the uh, the the rebuilding process is blocked by the cancer. There's a deficiency in how the bone marrow is now functioning because of the cancer. So the rebuilding process doesn't take place. So all the bones in my body were degrading. The first one that went was the humerus, but I did have PET scan afterwards, and I had holes everywhere. Yes, I had holes in my sternum. That was what had caused the original pain. I had holes in my skull, all the way through my skull. I had holes in my pelvis. In many places, there were holes in my body. And the oncologist said, not to worry, we have treatment to beat back multiple myeloma now and to reduce its intensity and to keep it from being as virulent as it would be without the drugs we have now. So here is the best treatment. And I'm going to send you to the City of Hope because they're terrific there, and their blood cancer staff is really exceptional. They're doing the best research in the country on how to combat blood cancers of one sort or another. Go there and listen to what they want you to do. I'm not even going to suggest it because I'm referring you to the chief bone marrow cancers on the service there. And I went to see a middle-aged, dumpy, plump woman who was from Thailand. She, she, she spoke English with a Thai accent, and she was like a mother figure. She was wonderful, and she she gave me a big hug when she met me. My arm was moving. I had very limited range of motion. I hurt if I lifted it then or tried to put it behind my back, but there was no pain when it was moving ordinarily, and not too much. It only took a few days after surgery for it to calm down. Uh, she said, I am going to put you on a chemical regimen for some period ahead. I'm going to give you two drugs. I'm going to give you a steroid. I forgot what steroid she gave me, and I'm going to give you thalidomide. I said, thalidomide? That caused damage to fetuses, for Christ's sake. It got outlawed by the FDA. She says it has very powerful effects on very parts of the body. And the research has shown that it will reduce the intensity of multiple myeloma. The FDA has cleared it for that sense. And if you're not getting pregnant, not carrying fetuses, there's very few, if any, side effects. It's not going to harm you in any way. Might make you a little sleepy, but you're going to be taking a big steroid that's going to be a big upper. And the thalidomide probably won't bother you. And she said, you're clear to just go about your life. What we need to see is your cancer leaves traces. There are bad proteins that are secreted in the urine. So we're going to be taking 24-hour urine surveys from you frequently. You'll take them to your oncologist in Santa Monica, and we will check for the presence of the aberrant proteins. And if the numbers keep coming down and coming down, as I expect they will from the chemicals we're giving you, if they get down, it was 20 parts per something, I think was the magic number. Then I'm going to suggest you come back and we're going to give you a bone marrow transplant. I said, you're going to do what? She said, we're going to give you a bone marrow transplant. She said, where are you going to, I said, where are you going to get the donor? Who the hell's going to give me the bone marrow to give me a transplant? She said, oh, no, no. We're doing what's now called an autologous bone marrow transplant. We are going to harvest stem cells from your blood, and we're going to clean them, and we're going to kill your bone marrow entirely. And then we're going to reinfuse you with your own stem cells, and your stem cells will start growing, and they'll become everything. They'll become red cells, they'll become white cells, they'll become T cells, and they will become the matter in your bone marrow. You will grow new bone marrow that isn't tainted with cancer from your own stem cells, because we're going to clean the stem cells so they don't contain any cancer. And I said, that sounds incredible. It sounds like magic. She said, well, that's the path, and we'll see. Start walking the first part. Start taking the chemicals I'm prescribing for you, which I did. So I had a very strong and good response. By July, this was in 2014. I had the surgery in January of 2014. By July of 2014, my bad proteins in my urine were down to just very trace, and it was time now to kill the cancer entirely. And I waited for another month. I was going to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award in the practice of psychology from the American Psychological Association at the convention in Hawaii that summer in 2004. And I wanted to go and receive my award. There was no reason I couldn't. I had been seeing patients all those months while I was taking the chemicals. I didn't even tell the patients I had cancer. I felt so good and was carrying on all my ordinary duties. And off I went, got my award. And the day after I got my award, I checked into the hospital. No, I didn't check in. They had to harvest the stem cells first. That's what they did. They pumped me full of Neupogen. That was the drug, I remember. They pumped me full of Neupogen because it stimulates the production of stem cells in the blood. And I would get a shot of Neupogen. I would wait 3 days. I would come back. They had put a tube in my chest. They had implanted a tube right here next to my heart. It went into my chest. It had a cap on the end of it. And the back end of it had a needle that was put into the vein that returned blood to my heart. So it was very easy for them to give chemicals that would circulate in me very quickly through that tube. But they were going to do it the other way around. With my tube in me after the Neupogen, I went, I was told I would have a 3-hour session. All I had to do was lie down. There would be no pain. So I lay down on a gurney and I could watch television. And they hooked the tube up to a centrifuge. And it was in, they added a second tube. It was in 2 parts. The blood flowed out of my chest, went through the centrifuge, and flowed back into my chest. And the blood was circulating and circulating and centrifuging for 3 hours. And the technician said, stem cells are heavier than all the other cells the blood is made out of. So the stem cells are being shunted to one side of the machine, and all the other blood is being shunted to the other side of the machine. They're separating out the stem cells from the rest of the blood, and the rest of the blood is coming back to me. I said, that's amazing. Even as I tell this story, who the hell thought of all this and did the research to make it happen? And actually, the machines they were using were adapted from the dairy industry. They're like the machines that separate cream from milk, because cream is heavier than milk. And so those machines were adapted for use extracting stem cells from people's blood. And they certainly served me well. I had to go through 3 sessions, 1 week apart, before they had enough stem cells. They were being smart. They took enough so that they would have 2 possible bone marrow transplants available to me. If the first one failed, Or if, God forbid, the disease came back after a while, there would be a second possibility of getting a second transplant. And both bags would be frozen until it was time for me to use one of them. And then the second one would stay in the freezer with my name and ID number on it. For as long as I was alive, it would be kept there just in case I would need it again. That was a comfort to me, too. So a week after I had had the final harvesting, the chemicals the Neupogen was out of my bloodstream, and I checked into the City of Hope. I was told that night that I checked in, they were going to hook me up to an IV that was going to drip all night, and it was going to be massive poison. It was going to kill my bone marrow. And around dawn, they were going to change bags, and they would hang the bag of my stem cells. And my stem cells would start dripping into me through the port in my chest, and it would replace the stem cells would replace what was taken out. Now, the doctor who was supervising me, Dr. Nadamani was her name. She came to visit me the evening when they were hooking up the bag with the poison in it. And she said, "You're getting on in years. You're in your late 70s now." She said, maybe I was even in my age. What, 2004. That was, yeah. I was approaching 80. She said, for some reason, my intuition tells me I'm going to give you a little less than what the standard dose is. You're elderly, and I think this will be enough to take care of the problem. And I don't want to overburden you with the possible side effects from a really heavy dose of poison. Boy, did she hit the target. Oh my God. I woke up in the morning. The nurse had already hung the second bag, and she said, "Welcome. This is your birthday. You've just been born." I said, "What?" She said, "You're like a newborn. You have no immune system whatsoever at this point. You've not been exposed to anything. You have no white blood cells. You have nothing, or you're soon going to have no white blood cells. And the new bone marrow is not grown yet, and it's going to be a while. You're going to be here probably around 6 weeks before your white blood cell count reaches a point where it's safe to let you go into the environment and interact with other people. We're going to keep you as sterile and safe as we can while you're still trying to grow an immune system again. You'll have a room by yourself. It has special HEPA filters in it. People are going to be masked and gowned when they come to visit you, and we'll keep you safe while you're here." I said, "How am I going to feel?" She said, "I think you'll feel fine. I don't, if there's activities you want to do, you can get up, for instance, and if you mask and gown yourself, you can probably walk around on the floor and get some exercise. You don't have to stay in the room all the time. If you bring a laptop here, you can do any work you want. You can watch television. You can have visitors if they mask and gown. That'll be fine too." And so that's how it started. And then it got really frightening. The third day, there seemed to be no change in my white blood cells up until that point. The fourth day, there was no change in the white blood cell count. The fifth day, there was no change in the white blood cell count. And Dr. Nadamani kept visiting me. She said, "For some reason, it seems like you've rejected the whole process. The poison is not doing its work. And if something fails, I think what we have to do is just discharge you, let you heal for a while, and then try again with the second bag. And I'll try and alter the amount of poison that I put in you. We'll play around with that. So don't despair. This is not the end of the road. We have a second bag of stem cells." So the social worker came to on the sixth day to start arranging my discharge planning, where I was going to go, what my diet should be like, any prescriptions I needed to take. My wife was being briefed too, and I was to be discharged on the seventh day. The seventh day, they, like they typically did at 6 o'clock in the morning, they did a big blood draw. Every day I was having a big blood draw. And it was easy because they took it through the tube. There was no problem at all getting a blood draw. I didn't have to prick my arm. And wonder of wonders, on the seventh day, the numbers all plummeted. I had practically no white blood cells in me at all anymore. It had taken place with a vengeance. And I was not discharged. I did stay there for the remaining days. I had one terrible side effect. The terrible side effect was I could not eat. God, just the sight of food made me feel like I was going to throw up, even though I was ingesting nothing. I had nothing to throw up. I couldn't drink anything but water either. I couldn't drink juices. I couldn't drink milk. I couldn't drink anything with any nutrition in it. All I could do was take some water. Even that was hard. I would gag on the water. So they decided, not a problem. They kept hanging nutrition bags on me. I guess there are ways you could just infuse a bag of nutriments into the bloodstream, and so they kept alternating. They would hydrate me and give me nutriments, and hydrate me and give me nutriments. I wasn't hungry at all. I actually put on weight. I was 2 pounds heavier at the end of my stay in the hospital. And for 6 weeks, I did not eat a goddamn thing. Nothing, nothing. Just amazing. I will tell you again, I am telling the story again. I have nothing but awe and respect for who knew what, how I got managed, and how creative and individualized my whole treatment was. And it saved my life. Uh, and other than not being able to watch people eat and feeling queasy at that moment, I felt fine. I started doing some telephone therapy with some of my clients who wanted to see me. I did bookkeeping, I did billing. My wife would bring things to me and I'd work on my laptop and then give them back to her. It was wonderful. I read a lot. I called people and talked to friends. Friends came to visit me and masked themselves. And my wife was incredible. I'm going to start crying. She did not let me spend a single night alone, even though I was more than 50 miles away from her at the City of Hope. She would work all day. She would get in a car in rush hour traffic. She would get through the downtown interchange and go way out to the east where the City of Hope is and show up about 7 o'clock in the evening. She had no bed to sleep in. There was only a big comfortable armchair. And she would spend the night with me, and she would do my laundry, bring me fresh pajamas. She kept asking me, is there anything that would tempt my appetite? Could she bring me some food? And she would be there and we would talk and she would tell me I'll be okay. And she wouldn't leave me alone. She did not miss one day in those 6 weeks. As I began to get stronger, my numbers got better. The last week, I was allowed to leave my hospital room actually while they were still watching me and wanted to keep me around some little more. And there is a facility where visiting families have like a dorm that they can stay in on the premises there. So we got out of my bedroom and could share a bed together in the night, at least in the dorm for visiting people. That was that even that felt so special. I'm climbing the ladder and getting ready to get back into my life. Uh, and I was discharged. I almost got killed by an automobile the day of my discharge. The last thing we had to do was stop by the pharmacy. That was the last step on the checkout route because there would be a prescriptions waiting for me that I was supposed to take when I got back into my home. And I was skipping and dancing, and it was a beautiful day out. It was a glorious Southern California day in the spring. And I couldn't wait to get in her car. and get the hell out of there. And as we came out of the building, I started running across the street saying, I feel great. I know where the parking lot is. I've been there many times. I know where visitors parking in. Come on, chase me. And there was a car. I wasn't paying any attention to the cross traffic, and a car almost smacked me. I was so exuberant and so energetic. I'm alive. It's like the movie E.T., not E.T., what the hell's the movie about the robot that comes to life? Well, whatever it is, I was like him. I'm alive. I'm alive. Uh, Now I will tell a secret. My wife tried to go online. There were handouts to read, and she was online looking at my disease, trying to familiarize herself with what it's like, what happens, what the odds are, and all the rest. And she would try and come and tell me what she was reading. I kept telling her, I don't want to hear it. All I want to do is know what my doctors want me to do today, and I'm going to do that today. Don't fill my head with what the disease is like, what you're learning about it, what I should know about it, what I should do. No, none of it. None of it. I'm going to do what Dr. Nadamani tells me to do. And when I'm back with my oncologist in Santa Monica, whatever he tells me to do. And I don't want all that information. It's only going to scare me and take my attention away from what I need to do. And actually, I've lived that way ever since. Now, I soon found that and this is the topic that I have inched my way into. I've soon found that my whole attitude about being alive had changed markedly from having lived through that experience. I couldn't wait to get back in the classroom. Aaron helped me with that because I had been discharged just in time for the start of the fall semester. Oh, it wasn't a spring day when I got out. It was a fall day. It was a beautiful fall day. And I couldn't go back in the classroom yet because they wanted to wait another week or two before I should mingle with other people. I could mingle in small groups of one or two people, but not in the classroom. They were afraid there may be too heavy a load of contagious materials in a classroom. So I had to wait a little longer. So Aaron came and helped me. I videotaped my presentation, and I sent him with the videotape so he could be the research assistant and a teaching assistant and show the tape and then try to answer any questions the kids had about what I had produced for them. And I couldn't wait to be back among them. Of course, my systems were functioning better by that time. I could not be discharged until I at least started eating and I had at least one bowel movement. So the hospital staff and the doctors would know that part of my system was functioning fully again because I had had no bowel movements either for 6 weeks. That was really bizarre. So I got the plumbing working again. I really had to choke the food down in the beginning. I didn't want any of it. I was glad I didn't throw up. I was like a woman with morning sickness, but I did manage to choke a few things down. I could eat ice cream. I could eat tuna salad. I could eat egg salad. I could eat cookies. I could eat. There were a few things I could eat. I managed to start eating nutrition, and by the time the first week of starting to eat went and I got discharged, I was eating a reasonable diet again. And I wasn't getting nauseous anymore about thinking about food. But every moment of life seemed delightful. Oh my God. I was in such a good mood, a mellow mood. It took a while for me to get pissed off about things again and to get frightened of things again. I was just mellow. Oh, and I had a double scare. I forgot. 4 weeks into being trapped in the hospital, I suddenly started to get chills and fever. And they were worried that I had gotten some kind of infection. And it was true. I had gotten an E. coli infection. It could have been virulent. Somehow my tube had gone rotten. Something had gotten through my tube and into my circulatory system, and I was moving towards sepsis. And I had to be rushed to the intensive care unit out of my private room, and they were watching over me and infusing me with tons of antibiotics. My temperature at one point spiked at 105, and I was starting to hallucinate. So I had a close brush with death, not from the cancer that was being treated, but from E. coli, and I beat that back. Oh, they removed the tube too. From then on, they had to infuse things in the ordinary way in my arm. Uh, so believe me, was I grateful to be alive. I'd not only beaten the death of the cancer, I'd beaten the death of the E. coli infection. So I was really radiant. I was radiant. Life tasted wonderful, felt wonderful, looked wonderful, smelled wonderful. And I noticed that I was noticing small things. Without any teaching, I was starting to do mindfulness meditation. I was focused on the now and on the surround, and not just on what my preoccupations were. My clients all looked beautiful to me. I could weep with the pain of their stories they were telling me. I was happy to be engaged with them. Trees were just glorious. Sunsets were unbelievable. The taste of food was like nothing I've ever eaten before. And I was so content and happy. One of the things that I was asked to do was to participate in a long-term outcome study of bone marrow transplants. And so I have been a research subject ever since I completed the marrow transplant. I'll jump around now. The study is housed at the University of Alabama, Birmingham School of Medicine. That is the principal research group located there. So once a year, I get a questionnaire sent to me from there. I fill it out, and once a year, I return it. And then about 6 months later, I get a data analysis about what the data are showing, what the experiences are like. I get a newsletter update about what are the changes being made in the treatment of multiple myeloma, on and on and on. I just got my most recent one 2 weeks ago. That's one of the things that prompted me to give this lecture, because 2 weeks ago, I did not want to look at the articles at all. I'm still in that place. I don't want to see what's being done about multiple myeloma, what the new treatments are. I made the mistake of looking at, they had a table of longevity data. Now going back to the late 1990s when they first started doing the procedure that I underwent. And they now know that the average life expectancy of people who receive bone marrow transplants is about 9 years earlier. People in that demographic die than people who are just in that age demographic. If you've had multiple myeloma, it's been treated with a bone marrow transplant, you're likely to die 9 years younger than your age cohorts. That's the median age at which death happens. Now that pissed me off. I was sorry. I read it. I didn't want to read anything more, and I didn't want to know about it, because here I am in 2004. I am now, this is 2022. I am now 18 years out, and I have had not one trace of multiple myeloma in me. And I certainly have lived more than 9 years of my age cohorts. I have not followed the curve. I'm unusual. I'm an outlier, and I intend to stay there. It was hard getting out of being preoccupied with, am I going to die? Life was so delightful, but I still didn't know if I was going to die. I was worried about the 3-year likelihood for the first 3 years. And I would have to go every month. They would take a fucking bone marrow sample, a biopsy out of my pelvis. They would shove an ice pick in my pelvis and crack it and scoop out some bone marrow and look at it. Each time it came back negative, no trace of cancer in the bone marrow. And they throttled back after the first year to quarterly. I went, and in the third year they did it twice a year, and then they stopped doing it at all. They went over to having me take a 24-hour urine assay once a year to see if any of those terrible proteins were reappearing in my urine. And even that got stopped 4 years ago. So I'm not being tested in any way anymore for the presence of multiple myeloma in my system. Nobody thinks it's necessary. I'm a miracle. I'm not in the cohort of people who have to worry. And I know what that cohort consists of because unfortunately, two of my clients are married to people who currently have multiple myeloma. And for both of them, the bone marrow transplant did not do a total extinction of the multiple myeloma. It reduced it to a very, very low level. And they constantly have to stay on some drugs that keep it at bay, and they constantly have to be monitored. And I am not in that cohort at all. One final, no, two final stories. I have 5 minutes. I am the beneficiary of some wonderful philanthropy. As you might expect, there was not a lot of research money for doing research on multiple myeloma because there weren't a large number of cases. The drug companies couldn't make a lot of money making multiple myeloma drugs, if they could even find any, and selling them because it was a very small number of Americans who had the disease, and there weren't any greater percentage anywhere else in the world. However, one of the women who had the disease is the wife of a multi-billionaire. And it pissed her off that so little research was being done on multiple myeloma. So she set up her own fucking foundation to generate research funds for the study of multiple myeloma and has given billions to researchers to study the disease. And interestingly enough, for reasons totally unknown, it's becoming more and more common, and the incidence rates in the country are going up. So she came along at the right time. It was because of her grant monies that the procedures I went through were discovered and undertaken, and God bless her. I need to find out her name again. I don't know if she's still alive. I should write her a letter thanking her for the gift of life because as much as any of the technicians who worked on me, she is responsible for my being here at this point. So I continue, how can I put it? The range of my emotions is fully back and rich. I continue, however, to experience just marvelous moments of joy at simple things that I think ordinary people don't pay any attention to or doesn't have much valence for them. I have been attuned to the wonders of the world in ways that I think people who haven't had a confrontation with death are denied because they don't taste the great preciousness of it all in the same way that I do. I'll give you a nice, crazy example. 2 days ago, no, today's Friday, it was yesterday. I was headed for my physical therapy session in Studio City. And I have a wonderful physical therapist who may be better than any physical therapist in the world. And that's why I make the long commute from Santa Monica to Studio City. She keeps me limber. She keeps me out of pain. She keeps me moving. She makes sure that all my systems are tuned well. And she uses me as a case study every time she has to put out a brochure. Here's the 92-year-old guy working out on the equipment. So I'm happy to repay her in part by being a poster child for the value of the work she does. At any rate, I was on my way there yesterday, and suddenly I was going up the grade. I was about 3 miles, 2 miles this side of Mulholland Drive, and I was in gridlock. Something obviously had happened on the freeway, and I started to say, "Oh, for Christ's sake, I'm going to be late to my appointment." And then couldn't do anything about it. So I put some classical music on the radio, and that was very nice. I called the studio on my cell phone and warned them. I had no idea what had happened or how long I might be delayed, but I was coming, and I would get there finally. And then I had to stop for about 30 minutes, 30 seconds to a minute. So I'm looking around, and I saw the rains had helped. The hillsides had lots of nice new greenery. And instead of looking parched and brown, the hills were beautiful. And I said, "Oh my God, look at the hills." I've been busy maneuvering in traffic. I haven't had a chance to pick up my head and see how beautiful the hills are. I hope it rains some more. I hope it's so barren from the fires that have been here. I hope lushness sets in the next year or so. So as I make this trip, I can see the lushness of natural plants that grow here. They are quite lovely. And then I looked down at my dashboard and I started talking to my car. I said, "Oh my God, I don't acknowledge you often enough. Jesus, you're 21 years old. I've had you forever. You're a wonderful Mustang convertible. You've given me very little aggravation. You've been a good friend. You've been with me on many, many adventures and never let me down. So I want to tell you I love you and that I appreciate you." So I have many crazy moments like that in my life. I talk to inanimate objects. I talk to people. I'm full of gratitude and wonder. And thank God, still taste better to me than they used to before I got cancer. Moments of tenderness feel better to me and richer. Uh, yes, I'm more alive to frustration. I can get pissed off easier too. But it's like the movie of my life has changed over from black and white to Technicolor. And it's very vivid and feels rich and wonderful to me. And I don't want to give it up. I don't want the movie to end. God damn it. I'll still keep cursing and protest. So, all right. I think that's the end of my presentation today. And you guys can unmute yourself and say whatever you want to say.
I have a few comments, and it seems like a story of awe. And your story is a journey of miracles, Arthur.
Yes, it is
Just
a
kind of
story
like,
of miracles.
yeah, one miracle after the other. I do recall when I was, I believe it was your professional roles class that I was in, and you were overjoyed that you had surpassed your father's age.
Yes.
Yes, and I remember that time. Um, Also, you had mentioned Elizabeth Kubler-Ross,
Yes.
I had met her when I was a child. She came and she visited my mother because my mother had written a book called Why Did He Die? A children's book on death. And she
Oh,
came and she sat in our family room and talked with us. And she was a very kind of like curious and kind woman.
yeah.
And yeah, that's all I can remember.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to mention that in some ways is certainly kind of like you endured miracles, but the kind of the hero of the story is Hermine,
Yes.
and in terms of driving to the city of hope every day, that's a hero,
Yeah,
to me.
she sometimes said to me, "I kept you alive." And I said, "Yes, you did. And
Yeah.
I'll honor you for that."
Yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would just say I do remember that time. It was a crazy time. I remember coming up to do those videos, and I remember my son had just been born and he was in the NICU, and I was
Oh,
struggling
yes.
with my own like life and death kind of stuff. And I remember, Arthur, you're just an easy person to talk to. And I started to talk to Arthur about it. And there I was looking at this guy who was facing his very own real existential issues. And he was so generous. He was there. He was more than ready. And I remember he looked over and he said, well, we're both going through some serious shit together. We'll get through it. And for me, that was always, I've always kind of aspired to the positivity you have, Arthur. It's not quite as ingrained as me. For me, I didn't have as many.
Well, maybe you need a cancer diagnosis, and then you'll feel what the gift is like.
I'm a believer in vicarious learning. I believe Wolpe figured that out, and I don't need to get cancer for this.
Thank you. That was very witty.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know if I'm going to take another couple minutes because you triggered me. I don't know if I told this story among my past meanderings. I used to have a semi-fear of water. My father used to throw me in the pool, and my father used to take me in the ocean. I'd splutter and cough and swallow water, and it was horrible. He was very sadistic about how he was going to teach me to get involved with water. So I grew up fearing the water. I never went very deep in the ocean. The ocean always felt like it had the potential to kill me. And when I was in my 30s, I was pushing against many wounds I had and limitations I had. I wanted to overcome them if I could. So I'm with my first wife and down in Laguna Beach on a hot Santa Ana day, and the Pacific Ocean is like a lake, hardly any wave action at all. And I decided I would swim out and I would conquer my fear of the ocean. I would go out a quarter of a mile because I knew I could swim and I was strong. I just was chicken to go anywhere in the ocean. So I overcame my fear and went out, and I was in a riptide. I couldn't get back in. I was going out instead of in while I was swimming, and I panicked and screamed, but I finally worked my way through it. I remembered that salt water was a buoyant medium. I remembered reading in a Scientific American article, the riptides are usually fairly local phenomenon. And if you just move parallel to the coast, even if you're moving backwards, you'll get out of the riptide and then you can get back in. So I did all of that. A wonderful mantra for life: swim for a while and float for a while. I calmed myself and I rested myself, swim for a while and float for a while. And then the ocean came to feel like a wonderful metaphor for being alive. The ocean can and will kill you eventually, but the ocean, if you surrender to it, will buoy you up and support you too. It isn't just a killer; it's a life sustainer. And as a matter of fact, all our life started there. The ocean is our mother in some way. So I had that epiphany that day, almost drowning.
Yeah.
All right, guys, it's time for me to say goodbye. Thank you for listening and for being with me.
Yeah, very good.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.